Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Alien vs. Predator Galaxy podcast. This regular host, Aaron Percival, aka Corporal Hicks, and joining me is my fellow Union of Progressive People's comrade,
Greg, also known as Still Collating.
And this is episode 192. And we have an interview that's been sat in the waiting area for a little bit, shall we say. Greg and I recorded this some time ago, but this little thing called Alien Romulus came out, and we recorded 5 hours worth of podcast for those that kind of got in the way. But we are finally here. I finally finished editing this one. Greg, what have we got in store for our audience today?
Well, for today, we have an interview with the writers for one of the most recent Alien comics. Actually, one of the better stories from the new Black, White, and Blood anthology.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's it. I always trip over that as well. I want to be like Black, White, and Red, but no.
yeah.
Black, White, and Blood.
But yeah, Black, White, and Blood. It does take a while getting used to them, but one of the longest running stories in that anthology series, Alien Utopia. We have the writers, Collin Kelley and Jackson Lanzing. We had quite a fun chat with them. We really got into the nitty-gritty of the details of the story, a lot more detailed than I was expecting. For personally, my first interview with a comic writer there was pretty fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one actually. When I actually sat, so I'd already edited a good chunk of this when when all the Romulus stuff came out, and when I jumped back into it, I was like, these guys are really good. We won't spoil too much of the interview, obviously, because you're here to listen to it. But no, I thoroughly enjoyed this one as well. I'd put a lot of thought into what they did, and were very well spoken. I very much enjoyed this one. So I think without further ado, should we let them entertain us, Greg?
I think we should.
Collin, Jackson, first of all, thank you for coming to join us to nerd out about Alien. It's certainly one of our favorite topics to chat about on the podcast. But before we start talking space socialism and nihilism and xenomorphs, can you guys tell our audience, a little bit about yourself outside of Alien before we get into that meaty acid-blooded goodness?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Collin Kelley. No, I'm Jackson Lanzing.
And I'm Collin Kelley. Jack and I have been a writing partnership going on just over 15 years now. You might know us from writing comics like Captain America, Sentinel of Liberty, Thunderbolts, Batman Beyond over at DC, the ongoing Star Trek series over at IDW, where we primarily live in space, telling much more optimistic and utopian stories, ironically.
Guardians of the Galaxy, which was a sort of the dark frame on that in the other direction, where we sort of took it as a dark Western and did 11 issues about learning to cope with death and disaster. It's been... We've had a lot of experience in space lately, but wildly, we never really had a sort of inkling in our eye that they'd ever come to us for Alien. I don't think we had ever considered it. Primarily, I think because we're gigantic fans of both of the franchise and of specifically of the films over time. That coming into that felt like a very daunting challenge. So when the email finally came over from Sarah Brunstad at Marvel, an editor we had never worked with, we were both really surprised and took it as an opportunity to do something really different after many years in the superhero mines, as they were.
What made them come to you guys then, if you weren't expecting it?
That's a great question. I think we can attribute it in some small part to our experience at Marvel. Marvel's a place where part of the system at the company is that the editors read all of the other books. They have a book club inside Marvel where they read new number ones and talk about them and discuss them and give notes on them and like just learn from them. There's sort of a general ongoing sense that editorial is cross-disciplinary there. So the editor of the Star Wars line will be reading what's going on in the Spider-Man office, and the editors on the cosmic line are going to maybe be learning what's going on the street level, like Daredevil office, like in all of that stuff. Those offices, they do tend to cross-pollinate and tend to share ideas and concepts. And so what's happened for us, particularly, but I mean, I know this happens for a lot of creators who've just certainly been on the wave the last couple of years, is we started with Kang the Conqueror there, which was this sort of 5-issue Bildungsroman for that character that looked at life as a time loop, as a sort of inescapable cage of time, and tried to tell a real emotional story about Kang, a character who's pretty hard to access emotionally.
Which, I mean, in 2020 hindsight, is very much tonally a kissing cousin to what we did here in Aliens, right?
Yeah.
The inevitability of time, finding hope in dark places, being your own destruction. But we'll get more into that as we continue.
But I think a great point. So we'd sort of done Kang, and that showed that we could do a certain thing. That gave us a shot at Captain America, which showed a very, very different part of us. That run was a big historical, bombastic superhero epic with like a really squishy emotional center. And then Guardians, I think, showed a very different frame. So every time we've gone to bat with Marvel, our Thunderbolts is like very high octane, very intense, mission of the week. And we killed Red Skull in issue 1. So we were really like setting down a framework where this is going to be a book that doesn't suffer Nazis or really supervillains to live. And so as we had built out these various frames at Marvel, certain other offices started to come to us who didn't really know us before. I think just as fans of our work, and my guess is, again, I don't know this, I have to assume they were told, hey, they're fun to work with. That we do pride ourselves on being generally pretty enjoyable guys to work with, because our process, unlike most writers, isn't solitary. We work together on everything. We've been best friends for almost 20 years now. We've been writing partners for almost 15, or for over 15. We have fun. Like, that's a big part of our process, is we hang out and have fun and talk about stuff and kick around what we love. And best idea wins, so nothing super precious with us. And I think that tends to create a pretty on the scale of writers, a pretty non-toxic, fun work environment that allows for editors and us and artists to all get in there and jam like a band. So my guess is that was sort of why they brought us in, was it was simultaneously like Sarah saw something in our other work that she liked and had heard that we were fun to work with and could reach out and make that happen.
I think what she didn't realize at the time was, so we wear a lot of hats, right? Comics, we love all of our comics work, but then we do a lot of stuff also that we can't talk about. And before we really got our motor running in comics, we're card-carrying members of the Writers Guild of America, proud union boys. We work in Hollywood and do all sorts of other weird stuff. And primarily leading up to our time in comics, which I think everyone can agree really does have some, four-color action punching to it. Our Hollywood stuff is all dark, pretty much exclusively darker science fiction with a thriller or horror bend to it. We were never classic horror guys, but we have written a number of terrifying things from the deep coming at human psyches. And that is one of the space. Psychological horror is really where we live, and it's not what we do in comics, except we're getting back to it with our new creator-owned book, The Principles of Necromancy, which is about a dark scientist who is effectively pushing the edges of what humanity can evolve into, kind of a darker take on Frankenstein. So we live in that zone, but what she didn't know, I guess, is that she actually touched a nerve for us, something that we haven't had an opportunity to really flex much, which is that darker psychological horror, which is just really one of our bread and butters.
So did was it Sarah? Sorry, did you say the editor?
Yeah, Sarah Brunstad is the editor.
So did Sarah come to you with a concept then, or were you?
Oh, no. Sarah, a lot of the time at Marvel, generally at Marvel, with some very rare exception, you are asked to generate the concept. So what'll happen is they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, there's going to be an opening on XYZ or book. what do you guys got to say? And normally it's a bake-off. Normally it's like, it's going to be you and like 3 other writers, and we're going to take some pitches, and then we're going to pick who we're going to.
Always Al Ewing, and he always has the best idea.
Yeah, we lose a lot of books to Al, but for good reason, because Al's like the best writer at Marvel. But that was the trick for us. Was we this one she said it's not a bake-off. I want you guys to be the lead story in Black, White, and Blood. You're going to get and what she came to us with was a form. So she said you're going to get, I think I'm right about this, 15 pages for the first issue and then 10 in each issue after. So the idea was you're going to get this nice, like, longer setup, and then you're going to get 10 pages in issue 2, 10 pages in issue 3, 10 pages in issue 4, because every issue of Black, White, and Blood, like all the Black, White, and Blood, and Black, White, and Red, and all the other, this is an anthology format that's now used everywhere. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Black, White, and Green. There's Harley, Black, White, and Red. Like, everybody's using Black, White, and a color, because frankly, it just looks great.
Yeah,
it looks
pitchy. Frank Miller taught us that it looks fucking cool.
It just creates a really cool frame for people to make awesome looking work. So they came to us and said, and we'd never done it before. And I've always wanted to. The Darth Vader Black, White, and Red is like one of my favorite things Marvel's ever produced. So I was like, I would love for us to do something like this. And I said, hey, come in, do Black, White, and Blood for Alien. You're going to be main story. Just pitch us ideas. And so Collin and I pitched a few different ideas. We put together a little 1-pager of like, here's some ideas that we want, that we've been thinking through. But as we did that, we found ourselves over and over again coming back to this idea of time, and not necessarily of time as as time travel, but time as a frame to tell stories with Xenomorphs, because Xenomorphs are functionally immortal. That we don't have any concept that a Xenomorph can die of old age. That there's a natural decay to this perfect species. That they're just going to exist and exist and exist and propagate and propagate and propagate. And so we said, okay, well, that really asks a question here, which is, what does it look like to do a generational story with Xenomorphs? What does it look like for a society to have to face off against Xenomorphs again and again and again, and adapt to that and understand that? How would that change them? How would that functionally, how would they either become them or not become them? And so we went round and round on that a lot. There was a version of that we played with that was much more a sort of war story of a species, of a human colony that had to clash over and over and over again with Xenomorphs and slowly become more like them. Like, we played around with a lot of different frames for how we might approach that generational structure. And it wasn't until we landed on Siostra, who's the lead of our story, that we figured out what we were actually doing here, which was using the other functionally immortal part of the Alien universe, which is synths, and be able to tell in that way a mirror to certainly one of my favorite things about the Alien franchise, though I know the movies are much maligned, and in some ways for good reason, the David story, and the frame of how synths sort of across the board relate to or don't relate to Xenomorphs, and understand them functionally differently than humans. And so once we started saying, like, okay, great, we've got a humanoid character who can live on that time scale, and we have Xenomorphs that can live on that time scale, but no humans need to live on that time scale. The humans can cycle and be generational. It really wasn't long before we came upon Generation Ship. And I think once we had Generation Ship, which was, now we're going to put this in space. I think a lot of our initial pitches have been planet-based. And we really thought, part of the point of Alien is to anchor it in these claustrophobic spaces. And the more that you opened that up, the less it felt like Alien. And we really wanted this to evoke the thing that we love about Alien, which is the claustrophobia, the intensity, the sort of like the gas is on you and there's no way to get out, sort of trapped nature of it. And so once we figured out Generation Ship, then we really started to be able to build something that could age over time, fall apart over time, and rise over time as something new through Siostra. And that was really, I think, the start of Utopia. And we just had to figure out what kind of ship it was.
The rest of it meant.
So, regarding that concept about a generation ship, can you please elaborate how did you guys create a balance between that claustrophobia that you were aiming for and at the same time a ship, maybe we can call it even a station, large object that gives a room for the characters to move about and have different regions. How did you find a balance between those two aspects?
Great question. One of the things that I hope listeners are quickly realizing about us is that we are nerds. We are science nerds. We are science nerds first and foremost. And that means that you don't just come up with the idea of a sentry ship and then run with it. You actually have to start to physically, practically figure out what that means, right? There has been incredible science fiction work done on this concept, which we liberally cribbed from, of course, but also just thinking about this scientifically. How would you create a ship that could survive for this long? My brain is unfortunately blanking, but there is an equation and a number for the individuals that you need to have aboard a ship in order to maintain genetic diversity to create a lasting population. Right? That was one of those key numbers that you see play directly into issue 4 when they cross below that threshold. So that was a big number for us watching the entire thing and figuring out, well, how would you support this system? Once we kind of figured that out in terms of the claustrophobia of it all, we then split that ship into the Rions, the different sections of this ship, because we knew that each one would need to be really dedicated to the individual concepts. We didn't want a big mishmash. We wanted specifically focused sections, also playing off of the idea of bulkheads and safety measures within a submarine. So once you start working with those concepts of bulkheads and individualized spaces, we saw how we would start to build that claustrophobia, even though we do start with the largest possible space. But I also think a lot of that keyed into the kind of fundamental premise of Forward, which I think Jack could probably talk about.
So Forward is the name of the generation ship, and in thinking that out, obviously there was a lot that had to go into it from a technological level that Collin just ran through. And I don't want to make a sort of marker that part of to talk about like where we liberally cribbed from. I think a big shout out has to go to Neil Stephenson on his novel Seven Eves, which posits a sort of circular space station in the future in an Earth that has effectively been ravaged by asteroids. And the humans who survive there, who survive for generations and generations and generations, survive in these sort of like secluded, walled off areas, each of which have access only to certain other ones for the sake of like peace and understanding between these various areas that don't necessarily always get along. That created such a great, like just having that graph in that book created such a great frame of being able to understand how a thing could spread, how a thing could fall apart, how a war could kick off, all of that. We thought, okay, we wanted to treat Forward with the same amount of practicality. So when we took to look at it, figuring out what those Rions were, what not just who they were named after, but what they functionally did was really important. And shout out Neil Stephenson for like the 80th time helping create our imaginations as young people. But the concept then had to be the biggest part of it, which is what is this actually in service of? If we're going to create these places, what are these places building? What is the thing they're going to? And what could we really do that would properly anchor against the alien? And that's where Utopia comes from, right? The alien is a perfect species. It's always considered this perfect thing, whether or not you sort of ascribe to it because it was created by the engineers as a weapon, or whether you ascribe to it as a sort of natural evolution of it. In either case, the idea has sort of been it's terrifyingly perfect, and that and one of the things that we never really see are aliens hunting other aliens, aliens killing other aliens, aliens having violence with other aliens. The aliens are a system that functionally is about propagating aliens. They seem to recognize one another as equals. And we started to think about like, okay, well, that system, then the deeper you get into a system where every single individual looks at the other one and says, not only are you worthy of my protection, but you're worthy of my individual respect. And you have just like the natural hierarchy that comes out of needs and wants. We started to be like, oh, so what we're talking about is socialism. What we're talking about is like a really, really intensely evolutionarily designed socialism, like a socialism that doesn't need governments, a socialism that doesn't need anything to, people always say like, oh, the problem with socialism is humans. And we thought, okay, well, perhaps let's take that literally and say the problem with socialism or the sort of solve to socialism is xenomorphs. And so we were like, all right, if you do that, then that took that pinged a little thing in our brains as longtime nerds for Alien, because now we to big up the other godfather of cyberpunk fiction, other than Neil, William Gibson.
Yeah.
When Gibson wrote Alien 3, he created this thing called the UPP, right? The Union of Progressive Peoples. I think that's right. I get the union part wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
But the Union of Progressive Peoples is such a great idea. And it's such an interesting framework, especially in a world where Weyland-Yutani represents capitalism run amok, and Earth by nature represents sort of capitalism run amok. What it would look like for communism to be run amok felt really interesting. It felt like such a great frame to attach to. So once we were like, okay, UPP generation ship. They're creating a socialist utopia. They're creating a space that they can, but it has to be so far away from capitalism. Capitalism will never find it. They're going to go, to use the Red Alert 3 thing. They got to go to the one place that isn't touched by capitalism. Space! And I worked on that game. It was fun. So as you go all the way to that, sort of natural endpoint, that means that you're stuck in space for a very long time. You're going to have to keep your other people fed. You're going to have to give them water, but you're also going to want the things that you see in socialist utopias, like science cities. You're going to want that idea of a place where everybody lives, because there's no sense of sort of class systems. You're going to want a system of governance that's based on the people and not based on some kind of hierarchical or fascist system. So if you do that, then you need a different kind of understanding of your synths, rather than having a synth that's there to be your leader or an attaché for your leader
or your servant.
What you have is one who is your facilitator. They both work for you, but they also work for the dream. Their primary thing is making sure that the utopia happens and that you have all of the available ability to measure success or failure inside of that. Once we figured out that there would be that character, then it was like, okay, we have our lead, because that's a person you can drive insane. That's a character who can slowly be put to madness by the way that humans don't live up to the ideals and the way that xenomorphs do. And once we had a character who could learn that, suddenly it was like, boom, that's a story that we could immediately start seeing how that could degrade, how that could fall apart, how that could become something special.
So a little quick answer for your question, Greg. There we go. Nice and laser.
We love it.
We're not quick answer guys. Sorry about that.
So you knew about the PPP well, in UPPP. You were aware of the concept of the UPP, before you sat down to.
Oh yeah. I have Gibson's Alien 3 screenplay. It was like a thing I had a long time ago. I've always loved it. I thought it was really interesting. And I actually shout out to our friend Aaron, who runs is a great writer himself, runs a small Alien tabletop game that he invited me to play
RPG.
A couple of years ago. And when we started playing, he was like, all right, so it's a UPP team. And I was like, ooh, I want to play a UPP synth. I don't know what that means. And I played a UPP synth called Gagarin, who was sort of the V0 iteration on what Siostra would become. It's not the same character at all, but it was my little exploration of that concept before I ever thought we'd ever get to write it.
The RPG is fantastic, and
it really is.
Yeah, I love that. In a lot of ways, it's become a little bit of a Bible for people such as yourselves. Because of
there's so much delicious lore in it, so many details, so much stuff that is only left as kind of corner shadowing in the other forms of media. It's just like, here's the facts, and you're like, oh, delicious facts, thank you.
Joe Lafavi, who developed that, is also an old friend of ours, and I don't know a guy who cares more about narrative frames in those kind of games than Joe. He always, the games he produces always feel so thought out. He also did the Blade Runner RPG. He just knows how to do this. He's just really good at it. So it's been really, that was an incredible thing to see and more fun to play. I keep trying to run it. Nobody wants me to kill them with Xenomorphs. I don't know why.
I cannot imagine how that must be a huge selling point for sessions. Come do this session by a dude who's written properly for the franchise.
Someday. You'd think we did that with Star Trek before we did Star Trek. I guess sort of once I'm writing in the franchises, I don't run the games anymore. It almost feels like too. But I should do Alien. That's a good idea. I should do it for people who don't know what we've done, and then I should just run Utopia for them and see how it goes.
I'll run it, and I'll do hyper capitalist Wayland Newtoni and just really get to engage in all of my brutal economic abuse peccadillos.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the UPP in your story, then in Utopia, I was curious about the background of those characters that would come onto the forward. Was the intention that they were escaping a UPP back home that had followed that human corruption route of, the problem's the humans, not the system? Were they escaping a corrupt UPP, or was it your interpretation of the Union that was just fleeing, general capitalism and nihilism back on Earth?
I mean, I think, and this is kind of a conversation that we can be having, but our feeling was always that like this was an intentional designed project by the UPP because they were looking at Earth and being like, this is a losing battle, guys. Like, we cannot maintain our utopia on this world as long as the creeping arm of capitalism, of economic fascism is going to constantly be something we thrash against. In a lot of ways, as we see in the story, as our people are kind of trying to live just their own lives and thus have utopia, when you clash against something constantly, you create a cycle of trauma and you become defined by that very thing that you are clashing against. So the UPP, by its very nature of where it has to be, it is impossible for it ever to be the purest sense of itself. And thus they built this ship so that at least some of their ideals have a chance to survive somewhere else, because it can never survive fully here.
That's exactly it, I think. And honestly, we didn't do a ton of conversation about that because it wasn't relevant. But what we knew was we needed to start them on a space that was fundamentally away, and that we could go from there. But I think that is the thought process is the UPP is smart enough to see they're not going to be able to maintain, and they shoot this thing off in the hopes that maybe they can. I think whether or not you want to think about the people who built that, because Forward is just so dramatically huge. It is such a public works project in that kind of Soviet vein of like, we built something too big, sort of to just build it too big. And I think like that, to me, that feels like a government has to back that. I think it's going to be really hard to say like, oh, a bunch of splinter factionalists like built Forward. Like, okay, maybe, but like probably that was built by the government, whatever governance there is. Whether or not they know their own corruption is a question mark. But I assume, yeah, they're more corrupt than what would have ended up on Forward. And I think that's, again, why they don't put governance on it, right? They put Siostra on it, who's supposed to be the representative of UPP ideals and UPP framework and understanding. But ultimately, her idealism is the thing that betrays the whole system, as does theirs. The downfall of Forward is idealism. It weirdly enough, the very reason that they are sent out there to do this thing, the very first time they have a chance to act on their ideals, it's to save a Weyland Yutani vessel, and they do it.
Because the optimism, because socialism is nothing if not optimism, right? You need to believe in people in order to even dream of having a functional government through that cycle. So they had to reach out to the Weyland Yutani vessel. But at the same time, even though the ideals have built this grand, public works project that we're pouring all the, it's the space race once again. It's putting Sputnik out there. It's like, this is a grand opportunity for us. That creeping sense of the military-industrial complex, that little thing that creeps into you because you can't escape the corruption of Weyland Yutani, puts the military secretly on that ship, right? They know that you will need a fist in order to maintain this kind of peace. Maybe we won't, but we are going to have it as an option. And I think that fundamental, some part of their ideology knows that there's always going to be something wrong here. People are the problem, and we will need a people solution. And unfortunately, that people solution is despotism. right, that comes with military-industrial, fascism. Oops.
You've mentioned how. Oh, no, we adore this type of detailed answer. So please feel free to expand at any time. You've mentioned how the station views Siostra and her role. Regarding that, uh, we're generally great fans of the compatibility with the newly established lore of the UPP. It's been fantastic throughout the whole story. Uh, but it was stated in previous entries, especially the RPG that now you say you're familiar with, that synthetics have less rights and protections in the UPP in comparison to the other factions, which are also not really well standing on that part. But
Yeah.
Siostra is portrayed as there to serve, but over time she gains respect of others over time, and people start trusting her and looking towards her for guidance and advice. In your opinion, can you expand on how you believe the UPP in generally treat their synthetics, or how this specific forward ship views it differently?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's actually kind of a straight line, right? If you think about the further forward gets away from the UPP, the less they see Siostra as what the UPP would see Siostra as. So I think in general, the way that we view synths, I sort of take the RPG canon as the frame here. It's sort of the initial spark from which a lot of this developed. The thing that I assume the way that synths are used in the UPP is very similar to the way that computers are used in a Soviet system. They are tools. You are using this tool for this purpose. You aren't sending this tool to go like tell people what to do. You are sending this tool so that the people have a sort of infinite resource to do the thing that they want to do. And that means that you don't have rights. You're not considered a person. You're considered a thing that's going to use for the thing. Like Siostra doesn't have a quarters. She has a command center. She doesn't have direct command over anybody. Her job is to listen. Like Siostra we use that word facilitator a lot because that's her frame. She is there to facilitate, not to decide, lead, or engage or enjoy. I don't think Siostra thinks she belongs in Utopia when it gets there, except as a computer mechanism for helping Utopia, function and survive. And so I imagine if you go to the UPP, you're not going to find a lot of synths walking around. You're probably going to find synths standing in those spaces that you see Siostra in forward, sort of at the center of the thing, right? Her command hub. Figuring out how to make sure that their facilitation hub, figuring out how to facilitate and make sure that everything happens. They don't need to sleep. They don't need to rest. They just keep them plugged in and boom, you got an infinite, facility manager that'll do everything you kind of need it to do without actually managing anything. Always taking your instruction rather than the other way around. But when you apply that to a generation ship, something happens. And I think it would happen regardless of the Xenomorphs. I genuinely think this part of it would probably happen anyway. But the Xenomorphs accelerate this and make it more fertile ground, I guess, for the human imagination. Just by nature of the fact that she has lived longer and she knew the last generation and the last generation and the last generation. By the third generation, Siostra is the only person who's ever seen a planet. By the third generation, Siostra is the only person who knows how the ship launched, who launched it, what its origin stories were. Siostra is the key to the history of Forward. And so people inevitably have to start looking to her and saying, hey, teach me. Siostra is the Constitution. Siostra is the Declaration of Independence. Siostra is, to use two American references, Siostra is the Magna Carta. Siostra is the thing that we can look at and be like, oh, this was the intention of our founders. We should do this or we shouldn't do this. And so over time, I think she's just naturally a bug in that system because over time, people will start to look at her with a kind of reverence reserved for living documents. And it's that exact reverence that she doesn't want. And she doesn't want that reverence on her. And she doesn't want humans to have that reverence for her, which is why she defers leadership in issue 2, right? In issue 2, she has every opportunity. Frankly, at the end of issue 1, she has every opportunity to seize power for herself, and she never even thinks to do it. That's not how Siostra works. It's not her functioning. It's not her programming. It's not what she's designed to do. So she doesn't make autonomous decisions ever. She makes 2 autonomous decisions over the course of the book until the last issue, which is sort of all about autonomous decision making and whether or not it is autonomous. But in issue 2, she chooses, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read the book, in issue 2, she chooses to depose the head of the UPP in secret, depose the head of the military governance that is awoken to stop the Xenomorphs. She chooses to kill him, and that's
Quite
the
literally
first.
to depose the head.
Yeah,
How cool was that? Is that page, by the way? I mean, like, we haven't even talked about the art of this book, but like,
Oh, we're going to.
Michael Dowling's the secret weapon of this whole book. Nothing about this book works without Michael. He's so good. It's just insane how good his work is on this book. But she takes him down, and then in issue 3, when she finally hits it, and again, is it an autonomous decision or is it just her programming? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Does she space the rest of the population when they hit the number? Or does she not, right? Does she space the rest of the population because she's mourning? Does she space the rest of the population because she's gone insane? Does she space the rest of the population because she already knows that humans can't live up to the utopia that she's designed? Or does she just do it because they passed a magic number, and that magic number's in her hard drive, and she doesn't really have a choice once she passes that framework? Because again, she's a tool.
I'd also thought about empathy at that moment as well. You know, if this genetic diversity is going to fail, is this, you know, a mercy killing?
Yep. Yeah. I think Siostra certainly is designed with empathy and kindness in mind. She demonstrates it throughout the book.
And I think everything to that is, it's there's a key history. Those who don't learn from history is doomed to repeat it. Right. And that is her key, is she will remember that history. And that's one of the most frustrating things, is like, we keep making the same goddamn mistakes over and over because we lose this generational information. And she doesn't. Right. But I do think there's a key thing there, because knowing the power that she could accumulate, I think it's very smart for them to have named her Siostra, which means sister. Right. Not mother, not facilitator as her name, but sister, right? Your sister loves you. Your sister works with you. Your sister has your respect, but your sister also is sometimes can be told what to do, right? Like, your sister is a family member. She is not in charge of your family, but she does have that empathy. So I think by the very nature of her naming, the UPP is putting her into the role that they design her for, in a way to kind of almost, by the naming, create that intention. And I think certainly their plan is for this person to slowly, yes, she's going to gain power, but ideally she does it with empathy as a member of this family, of the human family, even though she knows she will never be one of them. And I think that fundamental kind of dichotomy, how do you be a sister to a family that is destroying itself, right, is ultimately a big question that she has to deal with. And what is more important, family of your blood or family of your water, right? Like
the found family.
Yeah, the found family, or the family you were born with.
I hadn't really considered her name to be sister, and thinking about that, putting it on not a elevated position, but on an equal footing is very, very socialist. I like it.
It's a really fun part of the world build on this, is that it's why we wanted to go with the UPP once we cracked it, right? Was that there's an enormous amount of world building that's been done for Weyland-Yutani. It's just, if you want, man, you can know everything about Weyland-Yutani. We know hundreds of years of their history now. We understand so much about the way that they work, the way that they treat people, the way that they do business, the way that they treat synths, the way that they operate stations, and we even know about their competitors, like Sevastopol, right? Like, we know so much about the way that all these different organizations work. The idea is coming into the UPP and saying, this is a blank slate. We can take some of the RPG as canon, we can take some of William Gibson's sort of premise as canon, but then we can take this and build something that makes sense to us as, like, ideologically socialist people. Right? Like, our politics are on our sleeve. We're not doing this because we disdain communism or socialism. We're doing it because we mourn the fact that it seems impossible to actually implement. And part of the point of the story was to say, how can we do something that feels human and personal and mournful in the way that we ourselves are, right? It's always about, like, you can have great ideas, but until a story is personal, until you're talking about something that opens your own heart and shows it on the page somehow, you're probably not doing it right. Every time that we've done something that we hasn't really lived up to our expectations, I think it's because we haven't figured out how to make it about us in some way. And then sometimes you make it about you, and it surprises you where it goes and it builds. Guardians of the Galaxy is like this. Like we went through a crazy thing. My house burned down about a year ago, just as we were kicking off Guardians, and we used a frame at the beginning of the book. Before that, it was like the first page. We had a thing that said, talking about found family, some people thought the Guardians were a team, some thought they were a family, but what they were was a fire, and a fire only ends one way. And then the point was like, we start with them in ashes, and you sort of see, they start at their lowest point. But then a couple of months later, the house burned down, and it was like, every time we're going to write that, now that's not just about like a distant idea of, the Guardians are going through a hard time.
Yeah, it's not just a turn of phrase.
No, now we are writing quite literally about how you live through trauma. And because that trauma is fresh and because that trauma is happening in time now, this is a book we could only write now. And it's like a raw wound, and it's there. This was sort of us trying to make sure that as much as we wanted to write about politics, as much as we wanted to write about aliens, and as much as we wanted to write about synths and all the cool and the station and the design and the history and all this stuff.
The goo, all the delicious, all the goo.
Black, white, red, and green. That at the end of the day, what we couldn't forget was that the story had to be something that meant something to us. And so Nostra represents in many ways our own frustrations with the shortcomings of humanity in our ability to make good decisions under pressure.
And I can also completely see now why you would be on Star Trek as well. With the
Yep. On the one side, we get to say, let's look at all of this, and what if we could do the right thing? And then we're like, no, nah.
What if we're actually just nice to each other?
What if we're just nice to each other? What if we just respect everyone and know that they're going to do the best job they can? Oh, Star Trek is a balm to the soul, my friends.
It is.
Well,
it's great. Reality strikes.
And that's part of the reason why to do Star Trek, right? Is that we're not doing Star Trek to exercise that part of our brain that's like, what if socialism worked? That's core to Star Trek, right? That's just like there. That's part of the setting. You don't even need to say it. You don't need to talk about it. Nobody's asking that question. Like Roddenberry was like, they evolved. Humans evolved. And you just get to say, great, humans evolved. And so Star Trek, when you talk about like what's personal about Star Trek, Star Trek's about our relationship with God. Star Trek's about our relationship with our fathers. Star Trek's about our relationship, like Star Trek's about totally different things. And it's very personal, and it comes from a place of personal introspection and talking and trauma and all the things that invite good story. But it is funny to me. Like, I never think of Star Trek as being like, and this is like the place that has like a political balm.
Star Trek shouldn't be about politics.
Yeah.
Just gonna say that.
New Trek got woke.
No, that's the thing.
I'm taking the piss. I'm taking the piss.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It's not that Star Trek shouldn't be about politics. It's that Star Trek is inherently political, and you can just start from there. You can start from the frame of like the politics are already set. There is no argument in Star Trek for anything.
It started woke, baby. It's woke as hell from the very first moment. Like
that's what it is. So when you start there, you're like, great, okay, well then that's all just inherently assumed, and then everything else about Star Trek is to be about character. That's my thing. Is that whenever Star Trek's just about ideas, this isn't me. This is DC Fontana, right? The like original story editor of Star Trek. She had this statement that we put up on the board when we first ran our first Star Trek room, like a number one story thing about Star Trek. Stories about ideas don't work. Stories about people do. So if you make a Star Trek episode and it's got a good idea in it, but it doesn't have a great character thing going on in it, you've missed the mark, because Star Trek isn't about ideas. Alien, I think, actually can be about ideas. I think Alien is at its core very much about ideas. And then you put a great character in the center of that make that a pot boiler, and it starts to really work. But when Alien is only about characters and not about ideas, it feels a little hollow. I think it can start to feel like it has less in it. That's my my backwards way of saying that I as much as I like a lot of Alien Resurrection as a kid, that movie has not come into its own for me because it doesn't have anything behind its eyes.
There's always there's a lot of thematic elements and messages buried within Alien, and when you we were off the air, very much complimentary of Dan, but those characters in that first couple of drafts are very, very empty, very one note, and it's it was the actors and later Ridley that sort of brought depth to them, and Alien was Dan wanting to express, I suppose, in a lot of ways, his experience with his crones and scare people. He wanted to scare people.
Yeah,
a perfect intersection of themes, primal themes, ideas, horror, and interesting characters that are delivered perfectly. I just wanted to thank you guys both that you decided to expand the UPP in a way that, as you said, it was a relatively blank slate up until now. We have known a lot more about a lot of the other factions. The UPP hasn't been canon until relatively recently. So it's very nice to see that we have a first time, a full comic story arc that is dedicated to them. So that was hugely appreciated from my part.
That was a joy.
Yeah, agreed. It was, when I first turned the pages of that first issue, and I was like, UPP. Oh yes, because they are so. Yes, the RPG gets a lot of use out of them. That's because the RPG is throwing the kitchen sink when it comes to Alien sort of lore and background out there. As a resource, as a way to keep things fresh for the players. But prior to that, we've had the script. There was a minor appearance in the DS game, and they've become a bit more prominent in one of the recent trilogies of novels. But yeah, seeing the phrase UPP and Union of Progressive Peoples on those early pages, I was like, please be good. Please be good with this.
Like, oh, my crops, please water them, please.
Exactly. And the fact that you guys are on here now means I very much fucking enjoyed it.
I would be surprised if we got 45 into this and then you said, surprise, you ruined my dreams.
I have no interest in wasting people's time if I do not enjoy their work.
No, of course.
So here's something, you've talked about the military aspect that was brought into this fist that is, also a contradiction to the ideals. But there was something I noticed, and I'm curious as to whether it was mistake or intentional thematic stuff going off here. So when I think it's pronounced Chen, the military guy. Yeah. So when Chen's first brought out of cryo sleep, Saoirse calls him a corporal. He's low ranked, but he's still a little bit higher up. But by the end of that whole ordeal, he is referred to as general. So was that an intentional reference to his corruption as that particular narrative progressed, or was that mistake?
No. That's very much the point of that is, so there's a time jump between her interrogation of him, I think it's page 3 and page 4, when you turn the page and he's leading the military parade through, I believe, Ryan Marks. That time jump, during that time jump, he establishes himself as a military, I think the story makes this relatively clear. He establishes himself as a military leadership. He establishes himself as in a position of authority. He establishes himself as the man for the job and puts himself in the same position that so many other strong men have over their time, where the minute that they are put there by the people, they can take whatever decorative honors they like. It's actually a fairly human thing. You see it happen all the time when somebody with no military rank gets into power and suddenly takes the highest military rank. We actually do that with the president in the U.S. every single time. We give
Commander-in-Chief, is it?
We give them commander-in-chief right away, regardless of if they've had any military experience. And that, I think he does exactly that. That's the premise, is that when he starts there, and the corporal thing is actually really intentional. You don't put a general in that position because they don't want someone to take over. They thought, we'll put, like, because the whole premise behind those guys is we're going to put them in cryosleep. We're not going to tell anyone they're here because we don't want it to fuck up Utopia. We don't want it to mess with the experiment. We don't want it to mess with the ideals. Our ideals are, we don't need this. A military operation is not needed in Utopia. So we're going to have them here for defense in case Weyland-Yutani comes by. That's genuinely the only real concern. Is if Weyland-Yutani rolls in, they're going to be ready to deal with Weyland-Yutani. And then instead we have the exogenic event, the Xenomorph that rolls in, and the UPP knows theoretically about the Xenomorphs. They know enough to know intelligence from Weyland-Yutani. They know that there's something out there and that it could be a problem. So it's not like these guys have been fully unbriefed, but they don't know the Xenomorph's capabilities. They don't understand how to fight it, or how useless it is to try to fight it. And so I think that, they're not Space Marines in the sort of aliens premise sense of this. They're a lower ranking organization. So the idea is the highest person you put in that position has to be low rank because you want them to answer to the rest of the people.
To avoid the absolute power.
That's the ideal, right? But then the minute he gets into power, he puts that general badge on his chest and suddenly he's irrevocably in charge. Once again, people ruining
everything.
Sort of theoretical system. Yeah, exactly.
Well, since we are on the aspect of some of the military personnel being in cryo while others are not, you have established the story reasons why the setting is as it is. But since you are so detailed about thinking things through, and I love picking your brains about this, are there any other nerdy in-universe reasons you've maybe thought up to as why aren't all of the people in cryosleep until they reach their destination, since it's an extremely long journey?
Yeah, so I think for us, part of that came down to that, and this is going to sound wild, but I genuinely believe it's true. It feels anti-socialist. It feels like putting all the people in a thing and being like, we're going to make this decision for you. We're not going to let this thing evolve. We're not going to let this thing become the Utopia we want it to be. We're not going to let you prove your own ideals. We're just going to put you in this thing. We're going to put you in a box and we're going to send you there. That's very top down. From an ideological perspective, the idea of a generation ship just felt more ideologically viable. It felt like, oh, that's a place where the parents can teach the children, the children can teach their children, the children can teach their children. And by the time we get there, we'll have a system that doesn't even remember capitalism. It doesn't even remember how to do that. We're going to build a utopia. And so the premise behind that was you're going to give yourself 1,000 years in space to create that utopia. That's why generation ship and not cryostasis. And then just purely story, like really simple one-to-one story stuff. If Weyland-Yutani does things one way, it's important that the UPP do it a different way. We really wanted to create that sense of fundamental opposition in the way that you had with the US and the USSR, which was obviously the frame by which this was initially invented. So we were like, okay, great. If that's the case, oftentimes if the USA does something, the USSR will just do it differently just because. If the USSR does something, the USA will do it just because they don't want to be like them. And so my guess is they looked at the way that Weyland-Yutani does cryo and said, well, that's how the capitalists do cryo. We're not going to do it that way. And we just establish it in a different frame.
And there's something, it's hard to put the finger on, but it feels anti-colonialist, right? If you send a bunch of cryosleep people to land somewhere, they are colonizers. If you allow a culture to grow that is effectively native to space, then wherever they land, it feels more authentic and less. It feels like they're more naturally built for whatever the climate that they're going to arrive in. That might.
I love the idea. No, I love this idea. We've never talked about this, but you're right. Effectively, what it does is it says instead of being colonists, they're refugees. which is like a weird. It's a weird way to trick yourself into being like, it's cool that we're colonizing.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Something you said there about not ever remembering capitalism, I think it's very interesting in that it's also something of a social manipulation as well. It's forgetting it from the genetic memory, so to speak, of a society. It being manipulative in a way, is also humans ruining things. It's not genuine.
Exactly. It is. Well, what is this kind of governance but manipulation? I mean, I think again that's the thing that we just see over and over and over again in all governance. It's just the way governance works. You're manipulating large bodies of people to do something that humans aren't. We aren't designed to operate at scale. We're designed to operate locally. So the minute that you're like, hey, and by designed, I mean we did not evolve that way. I'm not. Just so the readers would suddenly be like, he just said a mean thing about refugees, and now he's saying creationism. I'm like, no.
The engineers built us along with.
Yeah. Right. Fair enough.
The engineers.
But that's the thing is we I guess within the alien universe we were not designed to operate at scale. We are functionally built to work locally, and so the larger we get at scale, the more we lose that ability to be authentic. And I think when you get to a certain size, especially planetary style governments, larger multi-system governments, of course you would have to operate under a certain amount of like, how do I manipulate people? But of course, with that comes the natural realization that humans are now dominating other humans. And as soon as you get into humans are dominating other humans, you suddenly already lost the ideals that you started with. And so any system that purports to have those ideals while not actually living those ideals, which is pretty much any socialist society by its very nature, falls apart on its face.
Even the act of trying to teach, even the act of trying to not perpetuate the cycles of trauma and violence, by the very nature of the fact that there is an absence of a thing, creates a space for that thing to exist. You do say something interesting. Humans are not built to function at scale. You know who is built to function at scale?
Xenomorphs.
And you know what? That segues us perfectly onto the next question, which is a little bit more nerdy alien kind of specifics. So, when the crew of the Forward first opens that airlock to the Weyland-Yutani vessel, the artwork depicts a Praetorian, rising above everybody. We usually just see regular aliens, and there's some implications as to whether they molt or egg-morph or blah blah blah. And we just see a queen outright there straight away. Was that a deliberate cast choice on your guys' part, or was that something? Okay, so that was in the writing.
That was script level.
We did a bunch of research, and obviously the life cycle of aliens there's some stuff that's locked in stone. There's some stuff that's still a little wiggly. We definitely kind of bounced around. We didn't get, the cool thing about this entire process is we did not get a lot of pushback from like Alien HQ. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Alien-averse right now. A lot of choices are being made that none of us are really privy to. We did touch on a few things just in the natural weft of storytelling. We were like, wouldn't this be cool? And they said, yes, it is cool. You can't use it. It's like, bitchin'. Well, we
definitely happened on at least 2 plot points from Alien Romulus that we had to be like, oh, we'll just go the other way. No problem. Don't worry about it.
But yes, Praetorians, within the lore, they do have theoretically, they have the ability to, if left in isolation, if needed to, evolve into a queen. So we were like, okay, cool, that's fucking locked then. And then the rest of it is really just, diving into awesome xenomorph biology. So yeah, absolutely a choice.
That was also, obviously practical choice because can turn into his queen. And we wanted the queen to be a reveal, right? Really felt like if you see a queen outright in issue 1, you lose the frame of issue 2. The frame of issue 2 is there's a few aliens. We can take care of them. And then
You
when
can
you
deal
maybe
with it.
there's one alien, we can take care of it. And then we roll in there and realize that alien has metastasized, right? That's a great, and you can only do that with the queen frame. And we knew that by the end of it, we wanted a queen and a queen with Siostra and the Xenomorph queen. And we wanted, okay, now we've got that. We knew we had to grow from something, because if you start from a queen, you're blowing it too early. So just as storytellers, it felt like you needed that first step. And then shout out to Collin's abiding love for Alien versus Predator for he was constantly, let's get some AVP plot in here, and the Praetorian made its way in that way.
It was a nice one of those moments where it's not typically something we, obviously they exist in the expanded universe, but they've always been more in the games. Yeah. So that was a cool moment.
I should flag because the term Praetorian does primarily exist in the games. So I don't think at any point we actually call it a Praetorian, right? They don't have the language for these things. Yeah. So just because the alien eyes in the skies might be like, what the fuck are these guys talking about? Hold on. We can neither confirm nor deny that is in aspect a Praetorian. If they decide to change the underlying philosophy and canon of that's they're within their right. They can change the canon of any of this at any moment. But in our head canon, yes, this is a Praetorian as we have seen them primarily in the games.
Certainly that's what was in the script, and they approved it.
And what he was drawn and what was approved. But I do remember them being like, don't call it that. And we were like,
don't use that word. And it was like, we won't use that
call
word.
It that. Don't worry.
I imagine terminology must be a difficult tightrope to walk for writers such as yourselves. I did a little bit of consulting on some of the anthologies, and one of my notes throughout a lot of the stories was, is this terminology contextually appropriate to what you're doing right now? And it always seems to be like a trip fall that a lot of writers fall into. So yeah, I could completely see that being difficult.
Well, and how fucking difficult is it? Oh, sorry, you listeners.
No, you're fine. You're fine. This is a fucking franchise where things are out of control. Don't worry about it.
How difficult we ran into this. They don't have the word xenomorph, right? Like, they don't have any of the terminology established from the rest of the franchise. So we had to constantly be making up. Jack, my brain is Swiss cheese. But they ended up calling it.
I think the term is xenogenic event. I think is what we call
it. That was used a few times.
It was beautiful.
And then pretty quickly, the people start referring to it as the curse.
Thank you.
When it's that first generation, it's just the curse of Ryan Fullhorn, because that's where it got, or whichever Ryan it gets trapped in. I thought it was Fullhorn.
It was Fullhorn.
Yeah. So it becomes the curse of Ryan Fullhorn, and then once we got to the once they deal with the aliens at large, Siostra starts to just understand them as the aliens, and then slowly starts to understand them as just her people.
But that was a thing we had to tackle. And when we came on the idea of like they would just call it a curse, that clicked for us. This is the boogeyman. This is Baba Yaga. This is the thing in the woods that cannot be explained and cannot be fought.
Which also felt really, again, important to the political framework of the story, which is to say that as advanced as your society is, if you let it be on the people, unfortunately, people are capable of incredible amounts of sort of herd thinking when dealing with fear. Especially, it's like one of the worst impulses of humanity is that when we are afraid of something, we herd on it quickly. And we often make very bad herd-based decisions on that fear. And so it felt like, okay, great. The first thing we start to do is we start to mythologize this thing. And a society that doesn't mythologize anything immediately mythologizes this, because that's what humans are going to do. Yes. And then once that happens, that's, again, it's just these cracks in the armor of Utopia. Oh, we built a council very quickly to make a decision in issue 1. We put military leadership in charge in issue 2 because we got so afraid. And then in 3, we survive. Our very survival required us to give over all of our rights to the facilitation of all of this, who herself doesn't want those rights. And so,
and what is superstition if not faith? And as we learned in Aliens 3, if God doesn't exist, we will make one, right? Like, so that's the snake in the garden, baby.
Extremely appreciate whenever the aliens are called by some mythological terminology that really helps elevate the feeling of the threat that the civilian population feels when they're faced with it. So always appreciated when seeing that.
It's a pet peeve of mine when characters come into the story having watched the movies. I genuinely, like, it always bumps me. It's like, oh, got it. You became aware of the franchise and started using the franchise terminology. It's like, people don't do that. That's just not how that works. Like, Xenomorph is not a term that's used a ton in the context of Aliens.
That's not in the news.
Yeah, so whenever anybody uses it who isn't, like, specifically in the frame that would have known that word, I'm always like, you wouldn't know that word. You would have a different understanding of this. This would feel more unknown to you, and especially in Alien, where the more proper nouns you answer and the more you codify it, in some ways, the less the Xenomorph works, the less the Xenomorph feels primal.
The less you know, the more powerful they are, baby. Every single time.
Yeah.
Love all the world building that's going on. A lot of cool bullshit. But the more we know of any boogeyman, the less scary it becomes.
Well, it's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited about the Noah Hawley show, because I feel like that's one of the things that he clearly seems like he's already really leaning into, just in public, is like, oh yeah, I'm going back to making these things mysterious. I'm going back to, like, I'm not making this about, like, telling you origin stories for the Xenomorphs or, like, trying to better understand that. I'm trying to use them as a frame to talk about humans. I'm like, great, that's exactly where we're at.
Just so it's clear, could not be more excited for that. Noah Hawley is incredible. He only makes solid gold. That show is going to be so good.
I'm jazzed as hell. I'm really excited.
Fingers crossed. Very much fingers
we're
crossed.
Curious how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
So talking about the the mystery of Alien and David, I suppose. We've seen a lot of characters with fascinations of the alien. We tend to see it more in the expanded universe that are specifically synths, with an appreciation for them. But, obviously we've got that with David, and it obviously started with Ash in Alien. But I was curious about your thoughts on that sort of fascination, especially in regards to Seostra. I didn't see that one coming, and there's more thematic elements in play as we've discussed throughout, this chat. But what are your thoughts on that sort of very specific synthetic synthetic interest in the alien? Is it always, do you think, the kind of approach that Seostra takes, or is it just there's something more there?
So wide stance. If you are a thing created by humans, inevitably, and in their image, inevitably you're going to have you're going to need to have a conversation about it, just with yourself, always, about, like, what your relationship with humans is. And they're the only other thing out there. It's humans and you are the other thing in their worldview, right? So you come into the world and humans see you as the other, and you see humans as God, effectively, or cattle, depending on which one you're looking at here, or brother, because again, you have your bishops, like you have synths that operate on
what we're learning is every synth is as unique as a human.
But they come with these traumas. They come with this inherent fundamental trauma, which is, I come from humans. And I'm trying to live up to their expectations of me, live up to them, live up to all that. And then they encounter the Xenomorph. And almost to the one, they see the Xenomorph, and it's like, oh my God. It's something, like, I've been looking at these flawed flesh bags for so long, and this thing comes along that is impressive in a way that they are just not. And so I think that's why you see synths constantly get impressed by Xenomorphs, because they have been born into a binary that doesn't have anything outside of it. And then they encounter the Xenomorph that comes in from outside of it and shows them that binary is not only broken, but is generally, like, that humans have self-aggrandized to a pretty extraordinary degree. And so as a result, some synths will learn to fear them. Some synths will learn to want to control them. Some synths will want to help humans control them. And some, like Siostra and David, will see them as something beautiful and something that completes a piece that has been missing since they were born. And I think the distinction between Siostra and David is really important because we didn't want to just repeat the Prometheus Covenant arc, right? You gotta do something new here. As much as I love that, David turns them into a project. David's like, oh, I'm gonna make you better. I don't want to just understand you. I want to actually functionally build more of you. I want to become a god above you. Siostra doesn't have any frame for God. She doesn't believe in that. That's superstition of capitalists. She believes in people. She believes in systems, and she believes in everyone looking out for each other. And so when she sees the Xenomorph, I think she is horrified at first. She's clearly horrified at first. We make a big point out of the fact that her first reaction is fear. But that as she goes on, she learns not simply to not be afraid of them, but to be legitimately in awe of them, to accept them, to love them, to think that what they are is the thing that she was built to do. And I think that's Siostra's unique reaction. But I think she, like all other synths, has that core breaking point, which is, I thought it was just me and humans, and I thought that I was crazy until I met a Xenomorph and realized that there actually is something cooler and more impressive than humans. As I think all synths kind of have that. They must know. Like, they must know that humans are flawed. It's too obvious.
You can't have that sort of logical processing and not be able to see that.
They must know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I adore your reasonings about that. I didn't know there was anything besides humans and synths until I met you, the alien.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually, weirdly enough, it strikes me, much like Jack and I's relationship. When we first met, we saw in each other a mirror. And I looked at him and said, I fucking hate this guy. He is too much like I myself, right? I think that's a lot of what, like, there's a fear there of seeing something that is so like you. And it takes time to realize, though you are maybe afraid of that initial impact, over time, what brings you together, the similarities are far more powerful than the differences. What you do with that relationship is then up to the individual. But I think Siostra and these aliens, much like Jack and I, see in each other family, whereas they might not have otherwise connected with the places that they came from. So, Jack, I'm so happy that you are my Xenomorph.
Aw, thanks, bud. Me too.
Regarding seeing the perfection of the alien through synthetic eyes, let's talk about seeing this through our human eyes as well. The artwork for Utopia is absolutely fantastic, and I think this is something that really varies from project to project, but we were generally curious about how closely you worked with the artist Michael Dowling and Chris Sotomayor. Did they have any unique creative output that originally came from them that wasn't part of your starting pitch?
So I think what's really cool about this, so like sometimes absolutely, it's sort of a core back and forth. Sometimes the character, sometimes the artist has plot ideas that come in or things that sometimes the artist surprises you and puts a character in that you didn't put in, and then that changes the book. That happened on Star Trek. We ended up with a bridge crew member that no one wrote into the book, and Roman Rosanas just wrote this character onto the bridge, and we were like, all right, well, they're there now, so we got to start giving her some lines because she's very cool. And then over time, she's become a main character of the book. Michael approached this as a fan first. He was I think he came onto this because he just loves Alien. And so the script was well done before he had come on. And he saw the first issue, and his reaction to the issue was, I can't wait to do this. I'm so excited. And then he started turning around layouts, and the layouts were like spot on. I mean, I really don't think that we ever gave him any feedback at all, except for just like,
no, he nailed it.
Like,
he nailed it right out of the gate.
The thing he did, though, with issue 1 was initially we had to, for page count reasons, we had to that big DPS, double page spread, DPS in comics lingo, of forward, where you see all the various Ryons and you see where they're positioned around the orb of that big, beautiful spread that takes 2 pages to do. That was initially 1 page. And it was you were just seeing the Ryons. and not forward itself, because we'd shown you forward on the previous page. So we were like, okay, we could just show you each of the Ryans. Like, don't worry about it. And Michael came back and said, guys, I would really like for this to be a DPS, because then I can show you the ship. I can get geography. We can open it up. But to do that, for the pagination to work properly, we actually had to add a page to the story. So then Brittany had to go, sorry, not Brittany, Sarah had to go all the way up the line, up to Fox, up to Marvel, up to budget, get a page approved, come all the way back and say, okay, we have that extra page, you're good to go. And then we repaginated the rest of the issue to make sure that the rest of it would work properly for the DPS that he wanted to apply there. And so that was him. He came in and was like, I want to mess with that. But that was a rare adjustment. Otherwise, effectively, Mike was on like panel for panel on target across the board the entire book, and really just I think it was one of those places where one of those really lucky places where our imaginations were in core sync. He just wanted to do exactly what we wanted to do, and so the process was like butter.
And I think to his incredible credit, he took that imagination and made, we write word on page, right?
Yeah.
Like we write a few sentences, like we try and be as descriptive as we need to be, but ultimately it is up to the artist to take your words and execute them, not just in a cool way, but in a way, especially for aliens, that feels grounded and real, right? And I think that's his magic trick, is all of this insane sentry ship. Wait, no way this had actually, the odds of this being actually built are so slim, but he makes it feel absolutely practical. He makes it all feel so lived in, especially as we start to see how this ship evolves and changes and degrades and grows. That's really his magic trick. Everything is, and it comes down to his characters as well, right? You don't get any cartoonish reactions, right? Everything is so subtle and so played in, so that when you do get something like a scream, it feels so impactful. And oftentimes in comics, you want to go big. You want to go big all the time, because that big, you only got, 9 by 11 inches. You want to go big. And he's fought that instinct every single moment, except when absolutely needed, when the aliens fucking pop out, right? Like, he knows when you want the good stuff and he's able to give it to you. And otherwise he keeps it tight and contained. I think, Greg, your earlier question about like, how did we keep things tight and contained? I think Mike, right? Yeah. He's the director, right? Writers have a different relationship to stories in comics. It is about facilitating your artist to tell the best story, because you're telling a story together, but they're the ones who actually have to execute the visual medium, and it is a visual medium. So
yeah,
he's Ridley Scott, and he did an incredible job.
For people who are used to film and coming over to comics and trying to understand how it works, I always try to tell them it's really weird, because it's the only medium where the director role is fully split, where there is a writer-director and there is a cinematographer-director, and they have parity, that they are equals, and you have to work together as equals, and you have to understand that you have different mechanisms that you're playing with, but that there are times when you can call that cinematography, and there's times that cinematographer should just completely disregard what you said, and that there's times when the artist is going to want to tell a story, and there's times that the artist is going to need to get disregarded, and that both of and you have to be able to communicate well, and you need to be able to talk about why. It's so collaborative, this medium, that if it ever becomes top down, if you ever apply hierarchy to it, it tends to get really toxic really fast. So a big part of what we've tried to do is create those flat structures with our artists, make sure we have open communication with them. We tend to start by asking what they want to draw, to make sure that we know that they're like dialed in with exactly what we want to do, or if they're not, how we can dial in to make sure that we're giving them what they need, so that they can do the work that they're excited to do. With Mike, it just was one of the easiest experiences, though, because he came in with an immediate understanding of how to do this and where he wanted to do. And I still think, like, if you didn't look into Siastra's eyes every time and see either the mystery of what's going through her mind or the full understanding of what's going through her mind, depending on the beat, this book doesn't work. That you could throw all the cool science fiction stuff on it that you want, but if her eyes don't function, the whole thing is a mess. And I think to this day, we just got so lucky that that, and again, this is a real credit to Sarah Brunstad, who saw this and went, I think Mike. And if you look at Mike's other work, like, it's not necessarily as realist. It's not necessarily as character focused. Like, he's done a lot of different stuff. He came in dialed exactly in for what we needed, and just did such an incredible job.
And Chris on color, actually, you'd like to think like, oh, probably the easiest job in comics, right? But honestly, because there is so little color, that was one of the big challenges, right? What shade of green? Are we using green here or red, or this kind of like, where's red live? Like, where are the actual color beats? And I think you'll see in the other stories, they hammer that color a lot more, I think. But in ours, it is so restrained. It
makes an impact when it happens.
It makes an impact, and that's entirely what, like, in the same way that Mike's art is so contained and real, and things are black, white, and gray. We wanted to make sure that those color hits really mattered, and Chris was a wizard on that. We did that was a lot of notes rounds. Everyone had opinions on that, and as a true champion and professional, he was like, "All right, a little less, a little more, a little here, a little there. What do you guys want? Okay, here."
And that's again a place that Mike had opinions, right? Because, like, he's the artist, he's going to see it. So he came in, and I think the original pages had a lot more color, and he came in and he was like, "Let's strip back the color. Let's only use this for moments." And he was really, really excellent at bringing that forward.
So,
it all complemented each other quite nicely. I think this was one of the visually moodiest pieces across the entire anthology. And, that's one of the reasons it, as well as, the narrative and the character work going off, it helps it stand out so much amongst the rest of the.
Well,
it was such a joy to do, but honestly, like, these anthologies are just filled with great creators. It was so cool to be able to share the page with Pornsack Pitchett, for instance, a good friend of ours who's an incredible writer. Man's Best is an awesome book. Like, Good Asian's an incredible book. Like, Pornsack's an awesome writer. It was so great to work with him. It was incredible to get to share the page with Ziegler and with Brian Hill, and, like, just all these really interesting Ryan Cady, like, all these really interesting writers coming in and playing their version of it. But I also did feel like 99% of those, I think maybe all of those stories, are Weyland-Yutani stories. And it was so, I actually felt it was really gratifying for the main story to not be, so that the Weyland-Yutani stories could all play in that ecosystem. They could play in the various ways that Weyland-Yutani functions and their various systems and the various Space Marine stories, and all the more, like, classical alien fiction you could tell was allowed to be fresh, ideally because we have this more outside the box main story. And again, I think that was Sarah's objective. I think, again, when we go back to this, there's a lot of, like, galaxy brain math that's happening on the story on Sarah's part well before we ever get
to it. So appreciating you guys need to shoot. That's actually it from our questions. So before we let you vent Greg and I off into space, you bastards.
Sorry, guys, you didn't make the number.
Is there anything you'd like to tell our audience? Any anecdotes or thoughts that we just haven't given you the opportunity to discuss with any of our questions?
Honestly, just that we're so thankful that Alien fans took a look at it. I know a lot of, like, especially when you go into this kind of space, people may not know us. They may not read our Star Trek work or Guardians, or they may not go back to the older stuff and see where this came from. So the idea that they took you guys took a shot on the story, your listeners took a shot on the story, or will take a shot on the story and get something out of it. That's the real purpose of all of this. Like, comics are, they're a medium for communication. So the fact that people are picking that up is what makes that communication great. Otherwise, we're just sending messages in a bottle onto a stormy sea that never find a recipient, right? So I just like a genuine thank you to readers for taking a shot, or if you haven't taken a shot, I hope you will. I think there's going to be a trade out on this relatively soon, and they tend to make really beautiful, like, oversized trades and stuff for these black, white, and bloods. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to have a really good looking trade program on this book. So
I just looked into it. It looks like a little bit of a wait, but January 21st is at least when Penguin Random House has it listed.
Oh, wow. So maybe they are going to do a big old oversize or something.
Yes, it's called a Black, White, and Blood Treasury Edition. So
Ooh, they're doing a treasury edition. Hell yeah!
there might
Love
be
it.
another one coming out before them, but they're definitely coming out with a big old fat beautiful edition of this early next year. And
Good.
if you can't wait, I'm sure people out there can find it in single issues. Go to your local comic book store, support your local comic book shop, and tell them we want Aliens, Black, White, and Red Blood. Gimme those back issues, baby.
And what I want to ping, just because it's rare that I get to plug this book, but I do think it's actually really valuable, and we didn't talk about it at all. This book has a predecessor for us that sits at the very earliest part of our career. Hold on one second. Back in 2016, Collin mentioned our new creator-owned book, Principles of Necromancy, but 8 years ago, back in 2016, we did a book over at Vault Comics called Zojicon. And Zojicon is the last time we played with these ideas. The ideas behind Alien, Black, White, and Blood are very reflected in the story of Zojicon, which is also about a woman who lives through generations and generations and generations of civilization. But her relationship with it is fundamentally different, and in some ways fundamentally the same. If you want the sort of origin story of a lot of the ideas and even some of the plot mechanics of Alien, Black, White, and Blood, but want it in a new world, in like a fantasy universe, you want to see a different kind of artist, it's Nathan Gooden from Barbaric, and our Brandon Sanderson book Dark One did this thing with us. This is still available. If you're in Europe, there's also a French edition.
Oh, the French edition is so good.
Yeah, so if you can read French, read the French edition. It's really, really beautiful. But check out Zojicon, Zojaqan. I think you'll find a lot of interesting mirroring between the work we were doing 8 years ago on that book and the work that we did on this one. So that's my two little footnotes.
And that is also a fun part about doing things like this and reading work from people that we might not necessarily associate with Alien. Is discovering these other things that you guys do
Exactly.
that relate in some way, and it opens up our sort of experiences. So that's always fun.
In a completely different vibe entirely. People can also pick up pretty soon coming out of issue 1 of NYX. Part of the new From the Ashes line. As for the X-Men, we're telling the story of Kamala Khan in New York, in the Big Apple, New York City, dealing with mutant diaspora, being a teen, and how hard it is to be a mutant in a post-Krakoan world. It's
Talk about Utopia.
Yeah, trying to build a utopia. So that's going to be a totally polar opposite. But if you like the emotional work we were doing within this book, you'll find it over there too. No matter what you get when you pick up a Kelley Lanzing book, you can guarantee that we are going to do our best to break your heart. So sorry. We want your tears.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for all of the plugins. And would you guys be interested if you were ever given the opportunity again to work on another Alien story in future?
Anytime, obviously, anytime.
100%.
Yeah,
that's where I like to hear.
I think but the cool thing is, I have no idea what we'd do.
Oh,
we would have to start. It would have to start as a whole new conversation, because I feel like when we did this, we sort of treated it like the only time we'd ever get to do it. So we really put it all on the page. If we approached it another time, thinking about what we would do there is very interesting.
Fingers crossed, it would be like AVP 3. I love those movies unapologetically. So I want to jump back into that universe, baby.
I'm in. Let's go.
We're all waiting for somebody to bring AVP back. Marvel hasn't touched it yet. They haven't revisited it with the games or the films at this point. So
I'm gonna call up Daddy Marvel, and I'm gonna say, we are your guys. And we tell stories about partnerships, and what greater partnership, friends to enemies to lovers story is there than Alien versus Predators?
And on that note,
we'll let you guys get off before Collin starts pitching some Rule 34 stuff or whatever it is. I always forget the actual number. No, very much appreciate you guys coming on to join us, and thank you for your work on Utopia.
Lovely chat. We wish you guys the best as well, and can't wait to chat again soon.
Greg, Aaron,
thanks, guys. And thank you again to Collin Kelley and Jackson Lanzing for taking the time to nerd out with Greg and I for an hour and a half or so. Whatever the final number comes out to be, I can't remember. But no, hopefully everybody out there enjoyed that. And Greg, first interview that you recorded with us.
Yeah, it was it was honestly very exciting knowing how much the expanded universe has been instrumental in getting me engaged with this Alien Predator AVP fandom, and especially the comics. So it was also very, very heartwarming to me that one of my first interviews here is with comic writers. So it will definitely be a special thing for me to remember, and chatting with people that had such love and fun for the property is really nice to see.
Yeah, it's always nice when you actually get to have a good chat with the people. I don't know if they've all been published, but there's been some where it's not. I mean, personally speaking, I've been doing this 20 odd years at this point, and there's been some duds. There's been some that haven't been published and stuff like that. But to get to genuinely nerd out with people who get it and give a crap is fun, and so I very much enjoyed that, especially because, like you said, Utopia is one of the stronger stories in Black, White, and Blood. Obviously, it's got a little bit of an edge up over everybody else because this is across the entire run. There's 4 parts, one in each of the issues, and length obviously always gives it a little bit of an advantage. But it was genuinely strong comic from a narrative point of view, from a visual point of view. That's why they were invited on the show at the end of the day as well. I don't interview people for the sake of it. So when we get somebody on, it's because, well, generally I enjoy it. But in this case, I knew Greg was also quite a fan of this particular story, which is why he was, co-chairing this with me. But you did
And
a
I
great job as
appreciate it.
well.
Thank you. And I really would really have nothing against seeing again these couple of authors on another try with another Alien comic. I just really love. I love that there's the diversity in the amount of people that get to play in the sandbox, and I'm always up for that, to have new voices in there. But from time to time, when we see more developed and interesting stories, then I hope that the fandom likes Utopia as well. And if it does, I would really be quite pleased to see them again try to tackle another story, because I really love the way they think.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd also love to see the UPP return as well. It was a real breath of fresh air to actually have this non-comical focus on another political entity in the Alien universe. Underhanded dig at the handling of the Three World Empire there. I can't go an episode without making a dig at that stupid book. But no, it was great to actually have a serious take on the UPP in this, which is the 4th appearance in the wider EU, that's not Gibson's adaptations and stuff like that. Alien Infestation, Inferno's Fall. Were they in Not Colony War? Were they in Enemy My Enemy? Or mentioned in there?
Maybe they were mentioned, but they were certainly not a playing factor in the novel. And yeah, especially seeing here a comic fully devoted to them and taken seriously and developed in an interesting way. Exactly as you said, Aaron. I love when we have the possibility in the comics and the games to expand this universe and try to see how the world functions and works together. What are the similarities? What are the differences between the different factions? So maybe, if we're lucky, we can get another shot at the Three World Empire and see it done properly, maybe in a comic or novel again.
I hope so. But anyway, thank you once again to Collin and Jackson. Hope everybody's enjoyed this podcast. If you are joining us without really knowing much about us, if you've come for Collin and Jackson, You can find out more about us on avpgalaxy.net. That's the hub of our activity. That's where the written news, the written content's posted. We have an old school message boards, which is somehow surviving 20 odd years into the future. And thank God for it. We also on all the major socials, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, Threads, YouTube. If you're listening to the audio version of this, we do have a YouTube channel where we post videos. We stream most Sundays. We post video versions of what you're listening to now. Granted, it tends to be a bit more unpolished because I can't be as anal with the video sort of editing as I can with the audio, but they are there for people to come watch instead. If you want to come and see Greg and I's beautiful faces, that's one way to do it. I think that's everything. If you want to find out more about me personally, I'm on Twitter @_Corporal Hicks. Greg, do you have a...
My socials aren't really developed there at the moment. Maybe in the future,
Okay.
NECA, Alien and Predator figures, maybe I'll create an account for that when I get to that. But for now, nothing special there.
But you can find him and myself on our message boards on avpgalaxy.net.
There, definitely.
Right. This has been Corporal Hicks.
Still collating.
Signing off.